Christy, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be making a card using the new Wilderness Adventure set from Hello Bluebird. So I've stamped my images out in Lawn Fawn jet black ink on some Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock, and I'll be coloring with my Copic markers. I'm starting with the bear, and for him I'm using E42, E43, E44 and E47. I wanted to do a little brown bear, and I really think these colors in particular work well for that because they have that little bit of a dusty quality that just is so great for these woodland and wilderness creatures. So I started with the E47 and laid in some shadows. Since he's facing toward the left, I'm going to do his shadows on mainly the right hand side, also on his legs that are on the far side of his body, any place where I feel like, the sun wouldn't hit as much. And then I'm blending that out with the E44. The E47 is one of the really dark brown markers. It's one of the darkest brown markers that I own. The only one that I have that's darker is the E49. So I want to make sure to really scrub over the edge of that with that E44 so it breaks up that line of dark color and gets me a nice smooth blend. Then I'm going to come in with the E43. I ended up coloring the majority of the body with the E43. I only saved a little room on the face for the E42, right under the eye. I wanted to keep that area light because I want to do a rosy cheek over top, and it's a little bit easier to do over a lighter color, so I used the E42 in that area. And then I did a second layer off screen just to increase that depth and saturation. Then I'm moving on to my little bunnies, and I decided to use some toner grays for them. I've never used toner grays on a bunny before. These are new markers that I've recently purchased, and you've seen me use mostly the darker colors, but I wanted to try using these lighter shades for the bunnies today. So I pulled out T0, T1, and T3, and I'm using the T3 for my shadows. I'm switching it up on this little guy since he's facing the opposite direction. I'm doing his shadows on mainly the right hand side, blending toward the left and keeping that area around the muzzle nice and light. I actually did like a little ring around the muzzle and left the plain white cardstock there. I'm going to do the second bunny with the same tones, but I'm going to do my shading like I did the bear since he's facing toward the right. I like to do that because it just keeps the facial area nice and light so you can really see those features. I don't want the eyes and nose and mouth to get lost in those darker shades and then you can barely see them, and then they kind of just look like little blobs. They don't really have personality. So I always like to keep the face light whenever possible. I also left a little white belly on this guy just for something different. And then I'm going to give them their rosy cheeks and also color the insides of their ears with R11 and R20. So I did the ears with both shades. I'm going to do it for the bunnies as well. Just a little line with that R20, and then I'll blend that out with the R11. And on the cheek area, I just do a little oval shape with the R20 and then trace around the edges of that with the R11. That shade is so light that it kind of just disperses the color and helps it blend into whatever it's being layered over. For the tree stump, I'm going to use 5 different shades. It's E50, E51, E53, E55, and E57. I'll use the 3 darkest on the bottom and the 3 lightest on the top. So the E53 is going to do double duty. It's going to be my lightest on the bottom and the darkest on the top. So I started with the E57, did a little bit of shading with that. I'm blending that out with the E55, and then I'm going to use the E53 like I mentioned in the center. And I don't need a perfect blend because I am going to add a little bit more detail to that. I used the E53 to trace the inner part of the rings and then blended that out with the E51 and the E50. And then I went back to my E57 once the base of the trunk had dried and just did some little lines to add some wood grain texture. Next, I'm going to do the mushrooms, and I wanted to add a bright pop of color since there's a lot of neutrals on this scene, since it is like a wilderness scene. So I chose to do them in red, and I picked R24 and R29 to start. I thought I could get away with just 2 shades because they're so small, but I ended up realizing I needed a 3rd shade for that highlight. I'm shading them with the darkest on the bottom right and the highlight on the top left, and I did pull in the R22 for that, and that's just based on the placement of where I'm going to have them on the card. And then for the stems, I just quickly colored those in with W3. For the mountains, I wanted to do something a little bit different, and I thought about the song America the Beautiful and the Purple Mountains Majesty, so I decided to go with some purple shades, but I purposely chose like some dustier colors so that it looks a little bit more realistic. So I picked V20, V22, and V25. I put the V25 down at the bottom, and I shaded the one that's in the back of the little trio a little bit darker than the others because it would be cast in more shadow. Blended up with the V22 and then finished with the V20. And then for the snow caps, I took a little bit of BG11 and just added a touch of that to give them a frosty look. For the 2 trees, I wanted something bright and fresh just to go in a different direction. Typically, I would color them in darker shades, but I wanted this to be like a really bright morning scene. So I went with YG21, YG23, and YG25. So I used the YG25 to kind of separate out each little section, blended out with the YG23, and finished with the YG21. The other 3 trees I stamped in Lawn Fawn Noble Fir ink. I did also use the E55 again to do the tree trunks, and then I grabbed my black Sakura Jelly Roll pen and went over the eyes of my critters to make them nice and bright and shiny, and then I trimmed these images out with their coordinating dies. So I'm going to be creating a mini slimline card today using the nesting mini slimline dies and also 2 of the Grassy Borders from the Grassy Knoll die set. So I've trimmed those out of some Bristol smooth surface cardstock, and I'm going to blend on some Salvage Patina Distress Oxide ink. I'm using my Waffle Flower Mini Medium Mat to do my ink blending on, just to keep all that ink off of my work surface. And I'm blending from the top 2 corners and the top edge in kind of like a semicircle pattern, keeping the middle kind of bright and white for now. I'm going to darken that up with some peacock feathers. This is quite a bit darker, so I'm going to use it kind of sparingly. I don't want too much of that. I just really want to deepen up those edges and create, you know, that vignette look. And then I'll go back to my Salvage Patina and I'm going to blend over the transition area and bring that a little bit further toward the center of the panel. Once I'm happy with that, I'm going to smoosh both of those ink pads onto my mini media mat and water that down. And then I'll pick that up with a fine paintbrush and do some splatter effect. I'm going to go in with the lighter shade, the Salvage Patina, first. That way I don't have to clean off my brush in between. And then I'll do the peacock feathers as well. Just create some nice little droplets for some extra texture and movement in the background. I'll set that panel aside to dry, and in the meantime I'm going to clean off my mat and then do the 2 Grassy Borders. I'm going to start with Twisted Citron on these. So I'm going to bring that in from the top on the bottom grass panel and blend that toward the bottom, and I'm going to do it from, well, basically covering the entire area of the one that's going to be in the back. And then I'm going to bring in some mowed lawn. And for the one that's going to be in front, I'm going to add the mowed lawn at the bottom and keep the top edge light. And then for the one that's going to be in the background, I'm going to reverse that. But before I get to that one, I'm going to go back to my Twisted Citron and just blend the transition area so everything is nice and smooth. And then I'm going to bring in that mowed lawn right over the grassy edge. So you're not going to see the bottom of that panel because they're going to be layered on top of each other. So you're just going to get that darker green, but they're still going to match because I used the same shades on them, just in the reverse. I added a little extra of the mowed lawn to deepen up the top edge, and then I'm going to smoosh both of those ink pads onto my work surface and repeat that process, just picking up some of the lighter color first and doing the splatters. And then once I'm happy with that, I'll go on to the darker shade and do some more detail and tapping that against my fingers so that I can control the size of droplets that I get. I like a little bit of a finer spray with a few larger droplets mixed in. I want to create a frame for my card, and that is really easy to do with these nesting mini slimline dies. So I'm taking the largest and the third largest, and I'm going to line those up on a piece of craft cardstock and tape them in place once I have them nice and straight, and run that through my die cutting machine. So mine will be just a skinny little frame, but you can customize this to whatever size you want, since there are so many dies in that nesting set. So I'll just peel off the tape and pop that out. There you can see my little frame, and I have that inner piece that I can save for something else in the future. Now I'm going to make my mini slimline. I've die cut a piece of cardstock to be 6 inches by 7 inches, and I'm going to score it on the 7-inch side at 3.5. So I have a 3.5 by 6-inch card base. Then I'm going to stamp my sentiment on my card front. So I've popped that in my MISTI, and I'm stamping that in Gathered Twigs Distress Oxide Ink. I wanted a brown ink that would lay on top of the Distress Oxides. So I decided to try this, and I'm happy to say it worked out very well. It was very crisp. So I'm going to use that same ink for the inside of my card, and that sentiment was from the Park Play stamp set, which is another brand new set from Hello Bluebird. I'm going to use the little raccoon from that Park Play set, as well as the other sentiment that says "Hey Bestie," which is super cute, and a little butterfly image. So I stamped that down twice as well, and it gave me a perfect impression again. So now I'm ready to assemble everything. I'm going to grab my Barely Art Precision Craft Glue, which has quickly become my favorite glue in my craft room. I'm going to glue that down to the front of my panel. It doesn't have to be perfect on there, just as long as it's centered, because that frame is going to cover up the edges. And I die cut that panel with the second largest, so it would fit perfectly behind. I added my bottom grass panel first, then I'm going to carefully pick that up and nestle the second grassy border behind that so that it's completely tucked behind, but you see that darker edge to give it a little bit more depth. Then I'll take my frame. I've added some foam tape to the back of it. I just cut it down super thin, and then I'm going to pop that up on the card front to frame everything in really nicely. I'll bring in my images, so I'm ready to start decorating and setting my scene. So I'm starting with the little bear, since he's the largest, and he's going to go over on the left-hand side. And then to balance him out, I'm going to add the tree stump over on the right. So we have brown on one side and brown on the other side. And then on that tree stump, I'm going to add the little bunny that is sitting up, just to give him a little bit more height. So he's kind of the same height as the bear, just about. And then between them, but a little bit more towards the other bunny, I'm going to have the one that's running. So he's running to greet his friend, and the bear is following behind. And then I'm going to take this little trio of mountains and nestle that behind the far hill, right over near the sentiment. So the sentiment is really nestled in between that mountain trio and the bunny's ears. I like to do that because it really just draws your eye toward that sentiment. The other mountain I put over on the left-hand side, and then I'm taking one of these tall trees and layering that right over top. So it really pushes those mountains even further back in the distance. And again, for balance, I'm going to take the other large one that I stamped and add that over on the right-hand side. Then I'll add the smaller tree that is also stamped in that Noble Fir ink and layer that in front of the other mountain trio. And then I've got my two green colored trees, so I'm going to put one over on the other side of the little mountain range, and then the other one I'm going to have a little bit closer to the viewer to kind of just create a little bit more depth in that scene as well. So we've got layers of depth with those trees and mountains in the distance. Then I'm going to add the little mushrooms in the foreground. I'm going to take two of them and add those right near the stump just to add those little pops of color there. And then the third mushroom, I wanted to bring that red over towards the left. So I'm going to add that between the bear and the bunny to kind of fill in that space right there. And then I noticed that the top left of the card was looking empty, so I grabbed a cloud from the Park Play stamp set and die cut that out. I'm going to add a little bit of shading to that using my BG11 marker, which is the same color that I used for the tops of the mountains. And then I'll use the Colorless Blender to just soften up the edge of that. And I'm going to glue that down in the top left. But I still felt like it needed one more thing. I have a couple little clusters of two in the front right corner. I have the two bunnies and also the two mushrooms. So I felt like it needed a little cluster of two on the top left to balance that out. So I grabbed a butterfly from Park Play, and I'm going to color that with R20 and R11, which is the same colors that I used on their ears and rosy cheeks. So that will tie in to that nicely and pull that color out just a bit. So I'm going to glue that over on the far left, overlapping that cloud just the tiniest bit to create that little cluster of two, like I said. As a finishing touch, I'm going to take a tiny bit of Stardust Stickles and just add it to the snow caps on the mountains. I wanted them to have just a little bit of sparkle so that they look extra frosty. So I just spread out a tiny bit and then use the nozzle to spread that around. And that is going to complete my card for today. So I'll lift that up so you can see how that catches the light. And I'll give you another peek at the inside. So I hope you guys enjoyed today's video featuring all these new Hello Bluebird products. I am loving this new mini slimline size. I think it's so much fun to work with. You'll find links to all the products that I used in the description bar below the video, and make sure that you're subscribed and have your notifications turned on so you don't miss any videos featuring the new Hello Bluebird products. If you'd like to keep watching, here are 2 extra videos I thought might also interest you. Thank you guys so much for watching and have a great day. Bye-bye.